Tennessee Office of Criminal Justice Programs to the Office of Family Safety for funding to supplement staffing for both family safety concerns. Item number 4, 2023-2104 by Roten, authorizes the Metro Department of Law to compromise and settle a personal injury claim of Arnold Marks against the Metropolitan government for $25,000 with said amount to be paid out of the self-insured liability fund. Item 5, 2023-2105, Roten approves amendment number 2 to a contract between the Metropolitan Government and Center for Internet Security. Apologize, that one right there has been pulled. Item number 5 is not on consent. Item number 6, 2023-2106, Roten, Hirsch, and Wealth approves the grant from the Tennessee State Library and Archives to the Nashville Public Library to provide access to and circulation of special materials formatted for individuals who are hearing impaired. Item number 7, 2023-2107, Roten, Hurt, and Welsh approves Amendment 1 to a grant from the Tennessee State Library and Archives to the Nashville Public Library to provide access to and circulation of special materials formatted for individuals who are hearing impaired. 2023-2110, O'Connell, Roten, and Hurt approves an in-kind grant from Hoop Bus in collaboration with Vanderbilt University to the Metro Board of Parks and Recreation to renovate and restore the Watkins Park basketball court to continue basketball court to continue building community bonds in Nashville through basketball. 2023-2111, Henderson, Roten, and Hurt approves an in-kind grant from the West Nashville Sports League to the Metro Board of Parks and Recreation for new fencing, gates, scoreboards, and infield work on baseball fields 1 and 2, and additional fencing and gates on baseball fields 3, 4, and 5 in Warner Park. 2023-2113, Roten and Syracuse approves an application for community-based traffic safety enforcement and education grants from the Tennessee Highway Safety Office to the Metro Nashville Police Department to continue the enhanced DUI enforcement initiative and target distracting driving and seatbelt enforcement. Item number 11, Roten authorizes the Metropolitan Department of Law to compromise and settle personal injury claim of Sheena Mullins against the Metropolitan Government in the amount of $7,500 with said amount to be paid out of the self-insured liability fund. Item number 12, 2023-2115, Roten, Druffel, Welsh, and Stiles approves a sub-receipt agreement between the Metropolitan Development and Housing Agency and Metropolitan Social Services for one-time payments in first month's rent and security utility deposits on behalf of homeless persons obtaining housing through various campaigns. 2023-2116, Roten, Withers, and Pulley approves a participation agreement between the Metropolitan Department of Water and Sewerage Services and Centennial Tennessee Partners, LLC, to provide stormwater infrastructure improvements through funding the design and construction of an improved stormwater system. Item number 14, 2023-2117, Roten and Pulley approves a donation from the Community Foundation of Middle Tennessee to the Department of Water and Sewerage Services to fund the residential food waste pilot. 2023-2118, Roten and Pulley approves a state water infrastructure program grant from the Tennessee Department of Environment and Conservation to the Metropolitan National Water and Sewerage Services Department to modernize and upgrade the Dry Creek Water Reclamation Facility. Item number 16, 2023-2119, Roten authorizes the Metropolitan Department of Law to compromise and settle personal injury claim of Denise Marshall against the Metropolitan Government in the amount of $110,000, and that said amount to be paid from the self-insured liability fund. And last but not least, item number 17, 2023-2120 by Roten authorizes the Metropolitan Department of Law to compromise and settle the property damage claim of Travelers Insurance as subrogee of Mid-South Property Management against the Metropolitan Government in the amount of $21,654.88, with said amount to be paid out of the self-insured liability fund. That's everything on consent. Can I get a motion? Motion properly seconded. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? You approve. All right, moving on to items not on consent. Item number 1, 2023-2044, as amended, Withers, Roten, Hurt, and others, creates a Nashville Needs Impact Fund to help provide resources to nonprofit entities serving Nashville and Davidson County and designated certain amounts thereto. Can I get a motion? Moved, properly seconded. And Councilmember Withers, do you want to discuss this? It's the You are recognized. Councilmember Withers.
Would I be able to defer to Councilmember Van Rees, please?
You sure can. Councilmember Van Rees, you are recognized.
Thank you so much, Chair. I'd like to go ahead and move forward with this in committee. So move to approve.
That's moved and properly seconded. We have two amendments. Councilmember Toombs, you're the first. You are recognized.
Thank you, Chair. The first amendment concerns requiring an annual report of the money that's contained in the fund, and I'd like to move that amendment, please.
Okay. We have properly moved and seconded. Do we have any questions on the amendment? Seeing none, all in favor? Any opposed? You approve the First Amendment, 12 in favor, 0 against. Councilmember Toombs on amendment number 2.
Thank you, Chair. Again, the second amendment adds to the bucket of potential revenue sources the 4%, not 4%, the $4 million water pilot, and I'd like to move that amendment.
All right, it's moved and properly seconded. Councilmember Gamble, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. I was actually wanting to speak on the bill after it's amended.
Sure. Is there anybody on the amendment? Councilmember Mendez, you're recognized.
Thanks. I'll vote no on this. As I've talked for half this term, I think the idea of setting up quote unquote dedicated funds that really aren't dedicated and that any future council can undo is fundamentally bad policy. And so moving more allegedly dedicated but not really dedicated funding into this really is kind of a shell game and not enforceable on future councils, and I think is so I'll vote no on the amendment.
Anybody else on? Councilmember Allen, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate us trying to maximize what's going into this, because I think it's a really important part of showing the people that we're trying to make this be good for everybody all over the city. I do have concerns about using the 4% water pilot. If I understand, is that the $4 million water pilot? Simply because when we went through that somewhat painful process of instituting the water rates, I said to all my constituents, we are doing this because this is what it takes to bring you clean water and to take dirty water away from your house in a safe and effective way. And it's important to me to be able to say that. And this $4 million water pilot is sort of the one thing that doesn't fit into that. It has nothing to do with making clean water and just the fact that a entity of the metro government has to pay us property taxes because we figured out it's a way to get money. It makes me uncomfortable. And so I appreciate the effort. I hope there's some other things that we do today that will put more money into that Nashville Needs Fund, but I'm just not comfortable. I'm looking forward to that water pilot going away so that I can look people in the eye and say, we raised your water rates just to give you clean water.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Benedict, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. Whoa, loud. New long cord, new loud mic. I think this is for the law director, legal director. So this $4 million, since the Nashville Needs Impact Fund is tied to the stadium and it's tied to the term of the lease of the stadium, is that correct? It is. Sorry, my question is, will this $4 million be tied up for the entire term of the lease that the Nashville Needs Fund exists?
The $4 million pilot payment is set up by resolution that was adopted in 1990, the late 1990s. I don't have the number right in front of me. There's no end date on that pilot arrangement as of yet.
I guess what I'm saying is that if this amendment to the resolution passes, it's basically going to put that money in the Nashville Needs Fund for the term of the lease, and then at that point, will it revert back to where it goes today?
The way it is written, it would make those monies available to be deposited into the Nashville Needs Fund. To the extent that that pilot is ever disbanded, then those monies would not be available for the Nashville Needs Fund.
And if those monies outlast the Nashville Needs Fund, then those will just revert back to where they are today.
They would no. Today no. They are.
Sorry.
We've pledged those to pay debt service on the existing stadium. If this funding is dedicated to the Nashville Needs Fund, as long as the council annually decides to put that money into the Nashville Needs Fund, then it would go in that direction. If the Nashville Needs Fund is terminated at the end of the lease for the new stadium, then those funds presumably would go into the general fund until the pilot itself is removed or terminated or what have you.
So just one last question. Thank you for all of these clarifying questions. This is really helpful for me. That $4 million today is going in the general fund, correct? No, sorry, you just said this, I know, but I want it to be clear as mud, not clear as mud.
Yeah, the $4 million today is pledged to debt service for the existing stadium.
And, okay. So until the end of that term, it's going to stay there?
Until that debt is paid, then it will continue to go to pay that debt.
Okay. Thank you.
Councilmember Pulley, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I won't rehash what's already been stated. My colleagues have asked questions and brought points that I originally intended to make, but I do have a couple of others. And this for the legal director, Ms. Darby. You said the money would be made available. Does that bind us to put this? Does this amendment bind us to do anything with that money other than? I'm not sure what make available means.
So the Nashville Needs Fund is set up in such a way, I don't have the document in front of me right now, so I'm a little flustered by that. But the Nashville Needs Fund is set up in a way that a committee is created, and annually the council has to appropriate funds into the Nashville Needs Fund. It's set up by resolution. Our budget ordinance is passed by, it's an ordinance, I just said that. It is an ordinance that gets passed. If for some reason a future council decides that they don't want to put that money into this particular purpose, then that's open on the table for them to do at that point. This is so an ordinance would override a resolution at that point.
Understood. And this is a process that we will go through annually with respect to that fund?
Yes. Every year, the council will decide what monies go into that fund. At this point, if the stadium ordinance were to pass under the way it is currently written, then every year there's a $1 million dedicated payment that would be put into that fund that's dedicated for that payment by other contract.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate all of and love all of the things that the fund is going to accomplish and the purpose of the impact fund. When I saw this amendment, it struck me that it might be a good discussion to go through during our budget process. It seems like that, to me, would be a good time to have this conversation. But for that and the reasons that were previously expressed, I'm probably going to vote no on this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Toombs, you're recognized.
I have a question for Director Darby. My understanding of the financing plan is that the $4 million pilot terminates in 2027. So does that mean that these funds wouldn't be available after 2027?
No, the pilot payment itself is set up by a separate resolution from the late 90s. There's no termination date on the pilot payment itself. After we set up that pilot payment, we entered into a debt obligation where we pledged this $4 million as a revenue source to pay down the debt. If the debt is paid off in 2027, which I believe is what is expected under the financing plan, then this $4 million is no longer going to pay that debt, but it's still coming to the Metropolitan government.
Okay, all right. And the way the Nashville Needs Impact Fund is written, this just creates another revenue source. It's not it can't. It's not obligating this council or any future council in any given year to because I believe the language mentions the council can decide to allocate some portion of the revenue. So it just creates another source. The decision could be to allocate none of it in any given year or some portion of it, right?
Yeah, I think that the resolution expresses the intent that this is a revenue source to be made available for the Nashville Needs Fund.
No further questions, Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember. Is anyone here from Metro Water? Sorry, try that. Hold on one second. Hold on. Try that again.
Hey there, Amanda Deaton-Moyer from Metro Water.
Yeah, thank you. I have a question. So I'm old, so I can remember when this initial contract back in the 90s was done, and I remember the uproar that was had over the money coming out of the water department to pay for the stadium. Could you just tell us exactly, on like a normal bill, how much percentage of that bill is from this pilot program?
So we have a $4 million pilot that we're talking about today. And if you want to look at that, I mean, no, I cannot break it down by a bill because everyone's bill is different. I can tell you what the average bill is, but if you want to look at our total operating, it's 4 million of 162.
So, but on an average bill, it's 1%, 2%?
Well, you can extrapolate that percentage.
Yeah, so a little over, yeah.
Yeah.
Right, a little before, 3.5. So 3.5% of your water bill is for this fund right here?
Right.
Okay, that's what I need.
I mean, I would do the math, but yes.
So if we took this off in 2027, if it comes off, we'd be lowering water and bills 3.5%-ish?
That would not directly relate to your water bill. It wouldn't go straight to water bills. This council would have to actually change rates, and we actually have a rate situation in progress. So it's not a direct relationship.
So you're saying you wouldn't want to drop the water bill? You like the money is what you're saying?
Well, I'm saying that our department has plenty of needs to utilize to make sure that people get water and sewer services.
Okay. You've answered my questions. Thank you very much. I'm sorry, Councilmember Allen.
Thank you. I just was said that's one more water main that gets fixed faster.
Yeah.
It seems like.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions on this? Councilmember Hurd, I'm sorry, you raised your hand earlier. You're recognized.
Thank you. So my question too is for Director Darby. Could there not be a resolution that directs the council to utilize that $1 million for the services that for the needs that they see fit?
I think that the amendment that's being proposed for the Nashville Needs Fund resolution, it is expressing the intent that these funds get utilized for Nashville needs. But every year when we go through that budget ordinance process, funds have to be appropriated for this fund. So these funds would have to be appropriated during that process.
So could that directive not be put in writing and in order to have some means of enforcement? You know, we sit here and we, pass legislation every 2 weeks. And I don't think that there's enforcement at the end, and we don't really know what the outcomes are, even though we passed legislation that's enforceable, but we really don't get a report on whether it is enforced. And some things are monitored because that's pet peeves of individual council members, but can we do something to ensure that those things that we want enforced are?
It would be better to have this type of a dedicated revenue source to be noted in an ordinance versus a resolution. That would give it more authority.
So can we do that? Can we submit it as an ordinance?
At a later date.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Benedict, you're recognized on the amendment.
Thank you. So this $4 million today, it's encumbered by the current stadium.
Yes.
Okay. So if we had this 4 million, which is the equivalent of roughly 1 penny of property tax that our citizens, residents, property owners pay in Davidson County, that 4 million could go into the general fund after 2027 is what I'm hearing from you. Is that correct?
Yes.
And so we could take that 4 million and maybe give teachers raises. Is that right?
The money would be in the general fund.
So it could be used for any general fund, like teacher raises, maybe hiring more officers, things like that. As I understand it, that's what's in our operating budget. And this 4 million is also to be used at the whim of whatever political body or administration there is. So I'm more interested in putting this 4 million directly into the general fund rather than in the Nashville Needs Impact Fund, just because I think we can have more of an impact for all of Metro if it's in the general fund after the date that the current stadium is retired. So with that, I'm going to be a no on this amendment. I think I understand the idea and I appreciate the sponsor bringing it, but I just think that this is something that I'd rather see us get in the general fund down the pike so we can pay more teachers. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Gamble on the amendment?
Yeah. Thank you, Chair. I initially wanted to just speak on the bill, but now I'd like to speak on the amendment, and I appreciate the discussion today. I understand the need to have more funding going into the general fund. This Titan Stadium agreement it's going to bring billions of dollars to our general fund. This Nashville Need Fund is important in my opinion because we need a designated account, a designated fund to address the priorities that have been identified by the community, affordable housing, infrastructure, and transit, so that we can start to make meaningful investments in that area, in those areas. And this Nashville Needs Fund provides an account to do that, similar to the COVID-19 Financial Oversight Fund, where we have a fund, we have revenues that are directed to that fund for the committee to review proposals, make recommendations to the council as to how that money would be best used to serve the majority of our residents. While I believe that this fund is very important and that we have a designated revenue source to that fund, I'm not convinced that this pilot is that revenue source. If we're saying that after 2027, after the end of the payments, debt payments, that $4 million would either stay with Metro Water or go to a revenue, or go to the general operating fund to address water infrastructure needs, then I think that's important too. But I don't want to, I guess it's important to me to make the statement publicly and so everyone understands. I think this fund, this Nashville Needs Fund is important. When we get to the bill, I want to talk about deferring it so that we can maybe add some amendments to expand the use of the fund. But the fund itself is important, and having a revenue source going into that fund is important. So for those reasons, I support Councilmember Toombs' amendment. And if the consensus is that we don't need to take the revenue from that water pilot into this fund, we need to look at some revenue stream going into this fund that's designated to those priority areas that have been identified by the community today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Oh, Councilmember Hurt, you're recognized.
So I did want to directly ask the question. Councilmember Gamble mentioned it, but for sure, these funds for the Nashville Needs Impact can be used for infrastructure and other things that the council deem important. Is that correct?
The funds are supposed to be used for, I got the resolution up on my computer now. They are supposed to be used for grants, would go to nonprofit entities in the areas of public education, public transit, affordable housing, and support diversity, equity, and inclusion, and gender equity in sports. So they would go to nonprofits whose area of whose mission encompasses one or more of those areas.
Right. I was just thinking about how there was a community that wanted license plate, needed cameras, and a grant was given to them to get those cameras. The funds that would support things of that nature.
It could, if that falls into one of these categories, I'm not sure that it does fall into one of these categories, plus license plate readers have a...
Well, the cameras, not the license plate readers, but the cameras themselves.
Okay, well, the cameras, if they are related to public transit, perhaps, or affordable housing, perhaps, but they have to be related to one, the use of the funds would have to be related to one of these listed areas of a mission for a nonprofit organization.
Okay, and so I didn't hear any infrastructure like sidewalks and things of that nature. It could not be used for that.
Not directly. That's not the intent of the Nashville Needs Impact Fund.
Okay, so if the funds were to go to the general fund, how do we ensure that those funds are going to be used for the purposes in which we've identified? Because I think we all really truly want to do as much as we can for our constituents. That's the reason why we've, presented different alternative budgets that would be more inclusive. And we need equitable distribution, especially when we get funds of this nature that's available to us. So how can we be sure that if these funds were to go to general funds, whether they are these or any other funds that may be coming, how do we ensure where they are going to be distributed?
To the extent that the $4 million pilot ends up coming to the general fund, then the assurance that you would have is through the budget process as to how any, just like any other tax dollars are spent, these would be treated in a similar manner.
But could they get lost?
Well, they're accounted for by the finance department.
Right, I'm saying, but can they get lost in how those funds are used? Not that they aren't designated and received.
They would not be designated. They would be $4 million that goes into the general fund that then is eligible for appropriation just like any other tax dollars. The Nashville Needs Impact Fund, to the extent that any funds go into that fund, then there's a committee that gets created on annually by the council that oversees the expenditure of those funds.
Right. Yeah. You know what? I hope we can work on making things a little bit more simplified and not so complicated, because we do have constituents that look at what's happening and they really want and need to understand what it is that we're doing. And so do we. So I would really prefer if we just talk in good, plain, yes, no answers and not maybe so, in order for us to really know exactly what it is and not have nuances that may deter the way one actually votes. So it just seems like in everything that was said that you basically said that the funds would be available, but we can't be sure how they're going to be used. And the Nashville Needs Impact Fund are going to be used specifically for those things that have been designated in the contract. And for us to change it, we'd have to use an ordinance bill to do that. Is that correct?
The $4 million that is the subject of the pilot is pledged currently. Once that pledge is no longer needed, then those funds will be deposited into the general fund, absent direction otherwise.
Okay, well, I'm assuming that funds are always going to be needed because we're going to always want to support our constituents as well as those nonprofits that need those funds. So I'm thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Van Rees, you're recognized.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you, Director Darby, for reminding us that a committee will be put in place by the existing council, much like the COVID-19 or the Barnes Fund, where applications can be made and then brought to that council. I think that's important, a reminder, and I appreciate that. I also wanted to make sure and remind folks that at some point we have to trust future councils. They may raise taxes, they may lower taxes, they may do stuff with water, they may get rid of funds, they may take away things that we did, they may enhance things that we did, but we are responsible for doing our best while sitting in these chairs. And I appreciate bringing another revenue source for this, and I think that it's appropriate to be able to bring these ideas. I am a big fan of the Nashville Impact Fund, and I think that it will continue to be funded, and I'm hoping that even future mayors and future councils, both with the Barnes Fund and the Needs Impact Fund, will fund it. I don't know whether or not the Metro Council can predict the future in regard to who's going to be mayor or council in 2027. So I think that providing an opportunity to be able to get the funds where we think that they should be, and then letting that body decide whether or not they need to change their mind or not, I think is appropriate. So with that, I support this amendment.
Thank you, Councilmember Van Rees. Councilmember Mendez, you recognize.
Thanks. Responding to Councilmember Hurt's request for plain, unequivocal statements, here's two. The Nashville Needs Impact Fund limits council choices in the future. Right now, any revenue that comes to Metro, every year the council gets to appropriate it to whatever it wants. And by passing the Nashville Needs Impact Fund, instead of being able to appropriate revenue to whatever the council wants, we're narrowing choices if it gets followed. And here's the other unequivocal statement. There is a 0% chance of anything we pass binding future councils on how money gets spent. And because of those two things, I hope everybody recognizes, despite the best intentions, this whole thing about the National Needs Impact Fund is a con game. It's a shell game. It limits the choices of future councils in a way that's not even enforceable in order to have a show of getting more money. We should be focusing respectfully on getting more money into Metro, not on fancy names for allegedly dedicated funding and trying to tie the hands of future council. Our focus were on more money to Metro instead of what it gets called, and coming up with a cool list of things that it's supposedly going to get spent on. We'd be better off, and the public would be too.
Thank you, Councilmember Mendez. Councilmember Toombs, you recognize.
So as I understood the concerns, some of the concerns raised by Councilmember Hurd, Director Darby, let's say that all of those revenue sources that are mentioned in the Nashville Needs resolution, that those revenue sources all went to the general fund. And let's say the total of those revenue sources was $50 million. Would there be a way to tell that there was $50 million in the general fund from those revenue sources, or it's just we have our bucket of money like we do every year and it gets appropriated to the different departments and entities?
Council, you recognize.
And I'm more than happy to let our finance director weigh in here. But no, we do, our budget ordinance and the finance department, they would record revenue sources, the location from where revenues are derived. Yeah.
Because the concern is transparency and being able to say, this is what's coming back to Metro, and also this is how we're spending that money that's coming back. So the better that we're able to track that, I think that works better for the community than it going into just a general bucket of money. But if we can track it either way, then maybe it's not that big of a deal. But I would err on the side of being as transparent as possible so that we can tangibly show what the benefits are of the deal to the regular citizens or everyday citizens.
Director Flannery, you are recognized.
Thank you. Yeah, tracking it in is easy. We know what revenues would come in, no different than, the $3 billion general fund right now is property tax, and we know how much that is, and sales tax, fines, fees, all of that. But once it comes into the budget, all dollars are green. So I couldn't tell you of my personal salary, am I getting paid out of a property tax dollar or a sales tax dollar? We could probably do a pro rata share based on the total collection, but you could not earmark the dollar that came related to the pilot is going to this specific item in specificity. You can't do that for any revenue source. It's not special to this one.
And that's the concern, Chair, of having the money just go into the general fund as opposed to a designated bucket of money so that we can see what's going in and we can see in what manner it's going out. So it's not about having a fancy name to a bucket. It's about trying to be as transparent as possible and be able to show tangible benefits to this deal to the city of Nashville.
Councilmember Evans, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to express that I'm going to vote no on this amendment, primarily because I think we can't predict the future, but I think in the future we will look back on how we allocated some of the federal dollars and probably have some regret on how we spent some of that money. And I think when we look at, if you look at the past with previous mayoral administrations related to direct allocations to nonprofits, one of the biggest complaints that I have heard around that is that it really ended up being, who do you know? Do you know the mayor's office? Are you connected in some way? And so my preference would be for funding to go into the general fund specifically for that reason, to make sure that we are making investments in the key things in our city that we know we need. I like the idea of the needs impact fund just purely based on the original revenue stream that we've already discussed, coming from the proposed project, but not to add a lot of additional funding to it. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Evans. Councilmember Benedict, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chair. Do I understand correctly, Director, that so all of these funds have to be distributed by nonprofits, right? No. How much of it is departmentally distributed?
Council, you recognize.
According to the resolution, these funds would be distributed to nonprofits.
Councilmember Van Rees, you were speaking.
Yeah, there's the last amendment that indicated that it was nonprofits or qualified applicants.
Okay.
So there may be situations to where folks need to apply. They still have to go through the process, but it would give them a chance to apply.
Thanks, Councilmember. Councilmember Benedict.
Thank you, Chair. So I don't think we've ever given cost of living increases from a nonprofit making that, but we do make cost of living increases from the general fund. So this $4 million, if it went in the general fund, we could use it for purposes that our Metro employees and our public have asked for, which is maybe building sidewalks or giving raises. Those are things that we can do through the general fund that I would like this $4 million. I hope that my colleagues support. When it comes time for the resolution, I will have comments reserved for that as well. Thank you.
Seeing no other hands on the amendment, we're going to do it by hands, if you don't mind. We have a motion properly seconded.
Can we get a roll call?
Can we get a roll call? Well, they're about to raise hands.
Can you read them off for the people watching? They've asked for it. The public has asked for it.
All in favor, please raise your hand. 4. Yeah. All against? 9. 4 in favor, 9 against. Yep. So we're back on the resolution as amended. It has been properly moved and properly seconded. Anybody comment? I'm seeing no hands. Councilmember Benedict, did you want to comment on the resolution as amended?
Yes, please.
Councilmember Benedict, you recognize.
Thank you. So I was a fan of the Nashville Needs Fund when it was created, but that was also under the premise that I thought we were going to have a whole lot more than $47 million. So knowing now that we only have $47 million coming, where it originated from was a naming rights conversation. With this, I am not in favor of the Needs Fund anymore. I just don't see the benefit in it with only $47 million, which is a trinket compared to the amount of money in this deal. This, to me, does not send money in the right way to the right places that we need it to go as a result of the investment that our taxpayers are on the hook for this stadium. And so for that, anything that we're going to do that doesn't bring money into the general fund or that costs us money, this to me just, it doesn't make sense. I really appreciate the thought, the work into it. I was engaged a little bit on it as it was being worked on. And again, I appreciate all of that. I just don't think now, given it only being $47 million, that it's going to deliver the results that I was hoping it would do when it was created. So with that, I'm a no. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember. We had Councilmember Allen, you recognize.
Thank you. Maybe out of turn to speak about a future, something that we're going to talk about, but my understanding is that there's an amendment to the ordinance that we'll be considering later that might put additional funds into the National Needs Fund, if I understood it correctly. And just, that seems to me to be relevant information as we're discussing our feelings about the National Needs Fund, that it may not be just be limited to this 1 million. There may be other stuff coming up later in the ordinance. Maybe we vote on it after we talk about the ordinance.
That will all be discussed tomorrow night on the floor. So, Councilmember Hurt, you recognize.
I also would like to know how it's going to be prioritized. And I mean, I know 47 million is not exactly all of what it is that we want, and it's small compared to what it is in this whole deal. But I really believe that the real deal is not even the Titan Stadium, but it's the East Bank development. And I think that for us to be fighting over pennies in the Titans deal when we can leverage some of the things that we've done in order to exercise that leverage and get even more money off of the East Bank is what I'm more, because I would rather be able to use those dollars in order to help the constituents that as much as we possibly can. But I do know that the $47 million, if it gets in the hands of some nonprofit organizations, I mean, I know some nonprofit organizations that could get $47,000 and it will save the organization. So I don't necessarily think that we should turn away any money for things, because the impact, I mean, I know it's a difference when you talking about All King's Men in comparison to Second Harvest. But I promise you that if Second Harvest gets $1 million, they won't feel it like the All the King's Men, because they would last forever with $1 million.
Thank you, Councilmember Hurt. Councilmember Gamble, you recognized.
So I'm for the needs impact.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I'm also speaking in support of the Needs Impact Fund. This fund, as it reads currently, is to provide resources to nonprofit entities serving Nashville in the areas of public education, public transit, affordable housing, and diversity and equity in gender sports. And so those are important priorities that have been identified by the community. And I think it's important that we have a designated fund, as I said earlier, a designated fund to address those things. The $47 million from the Titans going into that fund is a start. As Councilmember Allen stated, there are several amendments to this that would add additional funds, additional revenue, dedicated revenue to this fund at the tune of at least $100 million over the course of the term of the lease, which is a significant amount of money to be able to track and dedicate to nonprofits and departments. And as I said earlier, if there is a need to expand the use of the Nashville Needs Fund by amendment, I think that would be prudent to include departments and other organizations such as with the COVID-19 Financial Oversight Fund. So this fund is very important so that, as Councilmember Toombs said earlier, for transparency and and for equity, to make sure that the priorities that have been identified today in the community we have a designated fund and revenue stream to address them. And in addition to that, as has been stated earlier, there is over $1 billion, probably $1 billion at the minimum, from the development property taxes surrounding East Bank property taxes that will be going to the general fund on an annual basis that could address those other priorities that maybe aren't in this Nashville Needs Fund. So no one is suggesting that all of the revenue go into this Nashville Needs Fund. Just a portion of it would go into this Nashville Needs Fund to address priorities that have been identified today. But the bulk of the revenue from the development, East Bank development, and the new Titan Stadium would go into the general fund that would be at the purview of future councils and mayors to designate where the needs are. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Gamble. Councilmember Mendez, you're recognized.
Just to follow up on Councilmember Gamble's comments, so it's new information to me that the Metropolitan government would get $1 billion a year in revenue from the East Bank project. And if that is anything that finance, legal, the council office, anybody from any department remotely stands by, I invite you to grab a microphone and tell us that you agree with Councilmember Gamble. You said $1 billion a year.
Hey, Councilmember Gamble. Oh, let him finish and boom.
A couple times you said $1 billion, and then you just said $1 billion per year in revenue between property taxes and things adjacent to the project. And that's not remotely accurate. I don't question anybody's goodwill or good intentions, but that is not remotely accurate that there's $1 billion worth of revenue cumulatively or in a year. And if there was anybody in the administration who thought there was, I assume we'd hear from them right now.
Councilmember Gamble, you're recognized.
Thank you. That's not what I said. I stated that over $1 billion over the course of the term of the lease with the property taxes. That was what I intended to state. If it was misstated, then, but that's what I was intended to state, and that's what I thought I heard I said. So if someone from the administration can attest to the projections of what the property tax revenue from the surrounding development will bring in over the course of the 30-year term of the lease, then please feel free.
Mr. James, you're recognized.
We'll do our best to have a figure for you tomorrow morning.
Thank you. Councilmember Vercher, you are recognized.
Thank you, Chair. I heard $1 billion, so my ears puckered up back here.
I had a feeling they would.
So we're going to have concrete projections as it relates to future revenues for something that hasn't been developed yet. I just want to make sure I'm clear.
I don't know how concrete they can be. We were making projections about what if you take the entire East Bank and allow it up for development, including public and private interests, what the property tax generations will be from that. That is necessarily speculative.
Thank you, Mr. Jameson. In the spirit of speculative, can we also, while you're working on that, can we also get a speculative projection as it relates to infrastructure costs for the city? I mean, if we can do revenue, we can speculate on those costs as well.
Sorry. I think we can try and add to the response that we provided to the East Bank Committee, but we stand by that initial response, conservatively estimating about $150 million of revenue or of infrastructure costs in phase one. In phase two, we've been saying pretty consistently for the last 4 or 5 months, that is going to be developed beyond 2028, most 2027, 2028, and so. That is even more speculative than what you're asking us to do now. If you want us to put a number to it, the number we put in the CIB last year is 760. I think that's probably high, but that would be it on the high end.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Vercher. Councilmember Mendez, you're recognized.
While you guys are working on the speculative stuff, you might as well add in a speculation about how big the tax increment financing will be for the infrastructure over there. Because if we're going to talk about $1 billion worth of property taxes over 30 years, if say half of it was going to get captured and spent for tax increment financing, that would be important to know too, because that would turn $1 billion into $500 million pretty quick, divided by 30 years, really kind of immaterial to the whole deal. But while you guys are working on that, let's get what the projection is for the TIF spending at the same time. And just for, these videos are going to last for the rest of the time. Somebody will be watching it on a moon colony one day. Like, there is no $1 billion projection today, period, full stop. And if they come up with one overnight, well, let's take a look at it, but let's see the infrastructure cost and the tax increment financing piece too.
Seeing no other hands, we are on the resolution. All in favor, please raise your hand. All opposed, please raise your hand. We're missing one. Okay, everybody's in favor, please raise your hand one more time for me. That's where we missed one. I'm sorry. We were off a number. We couldn't figure it out. Thank you. 10 in favor, 2 against, 1 abstention. Moving on, item number 5, RS 2023-2105, Roten approves amendment number 2 to a contract between the Metropolitan Government and Center for Internet Security, Inc. to increase the value of the contract. I get a motion. Moved, properly seconded. Councilmember Allen, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just had a question which I actually got answered, but it seems like it's important to get it spoken out here as well. This is a 5-year contract, and we're adding, almost doubling it in the last 3 or 4 months of the contract. So I appreciated the answer that I got, and it makes sense to me. And if we could get that again, I'd appreciate it.
Mr. Durbin, you're recognized.
Thank you for the question, Council Lady. Keith Durbin, ITS. So we are near the end of the contract, and we had additional spending that we need to do based on the contract parameters. This has been working since about August of last year, and as we're approaching the end of the contract, we're going to spend it, and then we're also working on an additional sole source agreement for this funding that should take place starting in July.
Thank you, Mr. Durbin.
Thank you.
Thank you, Council Member. Seeing no other hands, all in favor? Any opposed? You approve. 13 in favor, 0 against. Moving on to bills on second reading. None of these are on consent, so we'll take off on number 18 on your calendar. Yeah, that's 2. Oh, my apologies. There were actually 3 put on consent after the fact that actually made it in. So I need to read through these, and then we can come back to the other 2. Item number 20, 2023-1794, Roten and Pulley approves a contract between the Metropolitan Government and Xylem View, Inc. to provide updates and maintenance of water network optimization, distribution system, and treatment plant optimization platform. 2023-1795, Lee, Roten, Withers, and Pulley authorizes Metro to acquire property located at Countryway Road and numbered for the Clean Water Nashville Town Village Sewer Pump Station Upgrade Project. And 2023-1796, Hancock, Young, Roten, and others authorizes Metro to acquire a portion of two properties located at 1213 and 1217 Northgate Business Parkway for the construction of a Dry Creek WRF flood mitigation system. Those are the three items on consent on second reading. Can I get a motion? Move properly seconded. All in favor? Any opposed? You approve. 13 in favor, 0 against. Back to the other two items on our agenda for second reading. Take that back. We have three items. 2023-1688, Bradford, Hancock, and Stiles amends chapters 8.04 and 8.08 relative to the regulation of animals. Can I get a motion? Moved and properly seconded. I'm looking for one of the sponsors to discuss this. We have an amendment, but I don't see any of the sponsors. Did they want to? We got a motion to defer one meeting, and are you fine with it? So, motion to defer, move properly seconded. All in favor? Any opposed? No, it's a deferred one meeting. Thank you, Councilmember Evans. Syracuse. But you were the one that said deferred, so I'll give it to you. All right, moving on to item number 19, 2023-1793, Benedict, Roten, Swara, and Withers approves a lease agreement between the Metropolitan Board of Education and East End Prep. We got a move for approval and a second properly. We got Councilmember Benedict with the microphone in her hand. She's at the microphone stand. Are you going to say something, or is that just a move? Okay, so we just have a movement for approval.
I'll say something in Education Committee tomorrow. I appreciate the administration's work on this, especially over at David Prophet's office. Thanks.
Thanks, Councilmember. We got a proper motion and second. All in favor? Any opposed? You approve. 13 in favor, 0 against. On to the last item. We have a late filed resolution. Item number 23 approves a grant contract for the provision of health services in encampment-based settings and rapid rehousing locations. And this is Councilmember Druffel. You are recognized.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. If I could defer to our Homeless Impact Chair, Director Calvin, please.
Director Calvin, you're recognized.
Hi there. Thank you all. So if you remember, there was a $50 million investment, $9 million for support services. This is $1.8 million from that $9 million in support services that you all already allocated. We're just going through the grants and contract process. We wanted to have this one on board the first of the month, but due to budget concerns and legal changing the words a little bit, that's why it's on a late file.
Yeah, the explanation. Councilmember Vercher, you're recognized.
Thank you so much, Chair. If you can you just remind us, where are those rapid rehousing locations?
The interim gap housing locations, it's at a hotel that's been converted into rapid rehousing. I don't want to just say the name of the hotel because I know this is televised, but most everybody knows the hotel. And then that's ran by the Salvation Army, and then Community Care Fellowship, Foundation, they have 4 interim gap housing locations in about 3 different church locations that's been converted into housing options for people.
Councilmember Vercher.
The question wasn't answered, but okay.
I can share it with you.
Yeah, that's why I was asking. I asked for a reminder. Thank you, though.
All right.
You can tell me.
Thank you.
Councilmember Druffel.
Yeah, I move the bill.
It's moved properly seconded. All in favor? Any opposed? You approve. 13 in favor, 0 against. We are adjourned. You didn't jump a bit. See?
has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.